Christmas dinner was already loud when I stood up, plates half empty, wine glasses sweating onto the tablecloth, everyone talking over everyone else. I raised my glass and smiled at my grandmother Margaret. "Thank you," I said steady, "for the bicycle you gave me last year. I still use it." The room kept moving for half a second. Then Margaret froze. Her fork stopped midair. Her smile dropped. She looked straight at me and said, "I gave you a Mercedes-Benz, though?" No laughter, no correction, just silence. My sister Claire, sitting across from me, inhaled sharply and nearly choked on her coffee. She stared at Margaret, then at me. My father slowly set his glass down. My mother didn't move at all. I didn't say anything. Margaret kept talking, trying to recover. "A silver one," she added, "through your sister, for your graduation." Claire's face went pale. I felt every ice shift, not toward me, but toward her. Because everyone at that table knew one thing. I had never owned a Mercedes. I had ridden a rusted blue bicycle for 2 years. And Claire was the only person who could explain how a luxury car had disappeared without leaving a trace. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. No one spoke for a moment. Then my grandmother Margaret laughed once, short, nervous. "Oh," she said, waving her hand. "Maybe I'm mixing things up." My sister Claire didn't laugh. She reached for her napkin and wiped her mouth slowly, like she needed time. Too much time. My uncle Robert leaned forward. "Mercedes?" he asked. "What Mercedes?" Margaret looked confused now. Not pretending. Actually confused. "For her graduation," she said, pointing at me. "I remember the paperwork. I remember the color." My mother finally spoke. "That's not funny, Mom." "I'm not joking," Margaret said. Her voice sharpened. "I wrote the check." Check. That word landed. Claire's chair scraped back an inch. She stopped it with her foot. I still said nothing. My cousin Lena pulled out her phone. Not obviously. Just enough to start recording. Margaret turned to Claire. "You handled it," she said. "You said you'd take care of everything." Claire swallowed. She started. Margaret frowned. "Didn't you pick it up from the dealership?" The room changed. This wasn't awkward anymore. It was procedural. My father cleared his throat. "Claire," he said carefully. "What is she talking about?" Claire's hands were shaking now. She pressed them under the table. "I thought," she said. "I thought she meant something else." Margaret shook her head. "No," she said. "I paid in full. I remember the invoice." Invoice. At the end of the table. My Aunt Susan whispered. "Then where is it?" Claire didn't answer. And that was the moment everyone realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a missing asset. And the only person who touched it was sitting right there, trying not to breathe too loudly. My grandmother pushed her chair back. Not hard. Carefully. "I still have the documents," Margaret said. "They're in my desk. Title transfer. Insurance. Everything." My sister's head snapped up. "No," Claire said too fast. "You don't need to dig that up. This is embarrassing." Embarrassing wasn't the right word. My Uncle Robert stood. "Margaret," he said. "How much did you say you paid?" "78,000, she replied. "Cashier's check." That number changed the room. My father reached for his phone. My mother whispered his name. Sharp. Margaret turned to me then. Her eyes were steady. "You never got the car?" she asked. "No," I said. That was the first word I'd spoken since it started. Claire stood up abruptly. "I need air," she said. She made it 3 steps before Margaret spoke again. "If that car isn't in your name," she said, "then it's fraud." No one corrected her. My Aunt Susan asked the question no one wanted to. "Whose name is on the title?" Claire stopped walking. Silence stretched long enough to hurt. Margaret looked around the table. "I'm calling the dealership in the morning," she said. "First thing, morning." That was the clock. Because dealerships keep records. Banks keep records. And insurance companies don't forget. Claire turned back. Her face flushed. You wouldn't do that to me, she said. Margaret didn't raise her voice. I already did, she said. When I paid. No one moved after that, because everyone understood what mourning meant. Not a conversation, a paper trail. And once paper trails start, they don't care about Christmas. Claire didn't sleep at the house that night. She left before dessert, coat half-buttoned, phone already in her hand. No goodbye. By 7:12 a.m., my grandmother was up. She didn't call Claire. She called the dealership. I was in the kitchen when she put the call on speaker. My Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan stood nearby. Yes, Margaret said calmly. I'm looking for records from 2 years ago. A silver Mercedes-Benz. Purchased outright. There was a pause. Then the man on the phone said, I see it. Margaret closed her eyes. It was picked up by your granddaughter, he continued. Signed for. Drove it off the lot. Robert swore under his breath. Margaret asked the next question without hesitation. Whose name is on the title? Another pause. Claire's, the man said. Transferred the same day. Susan sat down hard. Margaret thanked him and ended the call. No one spoke for a full minute. Then my father said quietly, She stole it. Margaret didn't correct him. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Receipts. The cashier's check copy. Insurance paperwork never activated. She handed it to Robert. Call your lawyer, she said, and tell him to clear his mourning. At 8:03 a.m., Claire started calling. Once, twice, then over and over. Margaret didn't answer, because at that point, this wasn't family anymore. It was documentation. And the next call wouldn't be from Claire at all. By noon, the story had moved past us. At 12:11 p.m., Margaret's lawyer called back. He asked for copies. He asked for timelines. He asked one question that made my stomach tighten. Was the vehicle ever reported as a gift to your other granddaughter? Margaret answered without hesitation. Yes, in writing. That detail mattered. At 12:26, my father texted Claire. You need to come home. She replied immediately. Please don't do this. At 12:42, the lawyer called again. The dealership confirmed identity, he said. The bank confirmed funds. The title transfer is clean. Clean. That didn't help Claire. It hurt her, because it meant the fraud wasn't accidental. It was intentional. Margaret didn't pace, didn't cry. She sat at the table and waited. At 1:05, my Aunt Susan received a message from Claire's fiancé. He wanted to know why a lawyer had contacted him. Susan showed Margaret the phone. Margaret nodded once. Tell him the truth, she said, and tell him not to ignore the next call. At 1:19, the lawyer sent an email marked urgent. He'd contacted insurance. The car was currently registered, active, in Claire's name. Margaret looked at the clock. At 2, she said, I'm filing a police report. No one argued, because by then, this wasn't about money. It was about what happens when someone gets caught standing between a gift and the person it was meant for. And there was only one way that story ever ends. At 1:47 p.m., Claire showed up, hair pulled back, eyes red, phone clutched in both hands like it could protect her. She didn't look at me. She went straight to Margaret. Please, she said, let's talk first. Margaret didn't stand, didn't soften. You had 2 years, she said, to talk. Claire turned to my parents, then to Robert, then to Susan. No one moved. At 1:58, Margaret picked up her purse. I'm leaving now, she said. 2 o'clock means 2 o'clock. Claire's voice cracked. You're going to ruin my life. Margaret paused at the door. No, she said. You already did that when you signed my name. At 2:04, Margaret was at the police station. She didn't dramatize it. She handed over the folder. Receipts, title records, the dealership confirmation. The officer asked one question. Did you authorize the transfer? No, Margaret said. That was enough. At 2:27, Claire's fiancé called my phone. He didn't yell. He asked quietly, Is this true? I answered honestly, yes. At 2:41, Claire started texting again. Not excuses this time. Threats. You can't prove intent. This will blow over. At 2:59, the police called Margaret back. They wanted Claire's address. And once they asked that, there was no pretending left. Because now the question wasn't what happened to the Mercedes. It was who was about to be charged for it. By evening, the damage had spread. Not loudly, quickly. At 6:12 p.m., Claire's fiancé called again. This time, his voice was tight. They came to my apartment, he said. They asked about the car. He didn't ask me what to say. He already knew. At 6:34, Claire's number stopped calling. At 6:51, my Aunt Susan got a message from a neighbor. Police car, parked outside Claire's building. No sirens, just waiting. Margaret sat in her chair and watched the window. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't say anything. At 7:08, the lawyer emailed again. Clary contacted, interview scheduled. Interview. That word does not mean conversation. It means record. At 7:22, my mother finally broke. "She's your sister," she said to me. "Can't you fix this?" I looked at Margaret before I answered. She spoke first. "She fixed it," Margaret said, "when she signed my name." At 7:41, Claire texted me one last time. "They're asking about the money. They're asking about intent." I didn't reply, because intent was already documented. The check, the title, the transfer date. At 8:03, the call came from an unknown number. Ems. Collins. A man said, "We're following up on a report." He asked if I'd ever received the Mercedes. "No," I said. He thanked me and hung up. And with that call, Christmas was officially over. Not because of what was said at dinner, but because of what had finally been written down. The next morning, the group chat went silent. No holiday photos. No updates. No pretending. At 9:06 a.m., Margaret received a call from her bank. They wanted confirmation of the cashier's check. Serial number. Date, purpose. She answered every question. At 9:22, the dealership emailed copies of the delivery paperwork. Claire's signature was clear. So was the date. At 9:40, Claire's fiancé sent one final message to the family thread. "I'm stepping back until this is resolved." No emojis. No explanations. At 10:01, Margaret's lawyer forwarded a notice. The car had been flagged. If sold, it would trigger another charge. Margaret closed her laptop. "That answers that," she said. At 10:18, my mother tried to reframe it. "People make mistakes." Margaret looked at her. "People also make choices." At 10:33, the police called again. They'd scheduled a formal interview for Claire. They asked if Margaret would be available later in the week. "Yes," she said. At 11:04, Claire's number reappeared on my phone. One message. "I didn't think you'd say anything." I stared at it for a long time, because that sentence explained everything. She hadn't believed the lie would hold. She'd believed silence would. And now that silence had turned into records, statements, and dates that couldn't be undone. By noon, the bicycle in my garage felt heavier than it ever had. Not because it was mine, but because it had carried the truth long enough for someone else to finally ask where the Mercedes went. By Friday, the consequences were visible. Not online, in real life. At 8:17 a.m., Claire's fiancé removed his last name from his profile. At 9:02, he stopped answering her calls. At 9:28, my Aunt Susan got a message from Margaret's lawyer. Charges were being reviewed. 2 possibilities: fraud or theft. At 9:41, my mother tried again. "She's scared," she said. "She didn't mean for this to happen." Margaret didn't look up from the table. "She meant to keep it," she said. "That's the part that matters." At 10:05, Claire texted the family chat. Just one line. "I can fix this." No one replied. At 10:22, the police came back. This time, they asked for witnesses. Who was present at Christmas dinner? Who heard what was said? Who could confirm the bicycle? Names were written down. Times were noted. At 10:47, my father signed a statement. He didn't speak while he did it. At 11:13, Margaret handed over the last document, a handwritten note she'd saved for my granddaughter. Graduation gift. That was it. The officer closed the folder. "We'll be in touch," he said, and when the door shut behind him, no one moved, because everyone understood something then. This wasn't about a missing car anymore. It was about how far a lie travels before it finally runs into paper that refuses to bend. Nothing else needed to be said after that. The calls slowed, then stopped. Claire didn't come back to the house. Her fiancé didn't either. The Mercedes was recovered the following week, parked in a garage across town, registered, insured, and moved. Margaret never asked for it back. She asked for accountability. That part surprised people. They expected anger. They expected forgiveness. What they got was procedure. Statements were finalized. Records were matched. Dates were locked in. Christmas decorations came down quietly. At dinner the next Sunday, no one mentioned gifts. No one mentioned cars. The bicycle stayed in my garage, right where it had always been. Margaret looked at it once and smiled. "Funny thing about paper trails," she said. "They don't fade." Claire tried to send one last message a month later. It never reached me. By then, everything that mattered had already been written down by someone who wasn't family. And that's the part I'll never forget. It wasn't the argument or the accusation. It was the moment the truth stopped being personal and became permanent. Because once that happens, no amount of silence can put things back the way they were.